from the winter meetings, does a tremendous job covering the Phillies for NBC Sports Philadelphia, Mr. Corey Sideman on the Comcast Business Hotline. How you doing today, Corey?
Tyrone, I'm great. How are you?
No, doing pretty well. Thank you for coming on with us. Let's start with the Phillies kind of make their first move of the offseason. They signed at least former closer Jordan Romano to a one-year deal. Ricky and I both really like his stuff. If healthy, what kind of player are the Phillies getting in Romano?
Well, from 2021 to 23, he was one of the best closers in the American League. And, this past season, he didn't pitch much because of an elbow injury that really, stifled him from spring training onward. I think it was only 13 innings that he threw, and he was shut down. He got cortisone shots twice. He had arthroscopic surgery in July, didn't pitch after May 29, and that's the only reason he was available, because if he had a healthy season, if he had a normal season, he would have gone through the arbitration process one more time with the Blue Jays. They really liked him. They initially drafted him. They didn't protect him in the Rule 5 draft, and he ended up in two different organizations, but ended up back with the Blue Jays and became a two-time All-Star. So, I think that the Phillies looked at this as a low-risk, decent-sized reward alternative to paying a closer like $40 or $50 million, because, Carlos Estevez, Jeff Hoffman, you might be looking at like 3 years times $12 million, 3 years times 13. A guy like Tanner Scott, he might even want a fourth year. So you're talking about guys who might end up making 4 or 5 times much in total value as Romano does on this contract. So if he stays healthy, if he performs, it could be a steal. That's a huge if, though. The Phillies, however, they do seem to feel comfortable that if this is their only high-profile bullpen addition, they feel confident with that group of 4 being Jordan Romano and Orion Kirkering from the right side, with Matt Strom and Jose Alvarado from the left side.
Well, let's start with third base with the Phillies. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about Alec Bohm, and he's on the trading block and this and that. Is this fact or fiction, Corey?
Yeah, I think that he is. There's been reports from around the league, so it can't be just fiction, because you have it coming from different sources. But I don't think that the Phillies are actively pursuing trades of him. He's a guy that they would listen on and have probably listened on because he has trade value. There's a couple years of control. He's a guy who was an all-star last year. If you're a mid-market team, for example, that's extremely appealing because there's cost control. There's the certainty that you have him for 2 years, and you're bringing in, a number 4, number 5 hitter, a big bat, a guy who almost drove in 100 runs 2 years in a row. But from a Phillies perspective, they would only move him if it makes them better. They're only going to move him if overall that puzzle becomes, okay, he gets moved for, say, a starting pitcher, and then you trade something else for a third baseman, or you have to move parts around. But it's just a complicated picture because, like Alex Bregman, for example, he's the top available position player, free agent. He plays third base. But if you're the Phillies, it's not like you can sign Alex Bregman for $250 million or whatever that's going to cost and lose all leverage in a Bohm trade and then have to trade him for 20 cents on the dollar. That's not good roster building either. So his name has been out there because he has value and he's a guy that could bring something back in a trade. But, talking to Dave Dombrowski yesterday, the theme was the Phillies are just scoping out overall improvement. He said there isn't a clear priority. It seems obvious from the outside that center field is a place where the Phillies are not going to just run back the same situation, but the Phillies are scoping out a wide array of opportunities. Starting pitching is the last thing you'd think they'd add to, but that's even an area where if the right player, if the right fit comes along, they could pounce.
Corey, for some fans, that the answers that Dave Dombrowski, in fact, some reacted very negatively to the interview you did. I'm sure you saw some of the comments because they feel like between the Dodgers and the Mets and other teams like they've been passed. Where do you think right now the Phillies are in the National League? Have they been passed to a point where if they don't make a drastic move, they can't win the World Series?
Well, I think that if the season began tomorrow, the top 4 teams in the National League would be the Dodgers, Braves, Phillies, and Mets. And that was the case last year as well, I would say, going into the season. The Braves suffered those really catastrophic injuries, but that's the other part of this, too. They're going to have Strider and Acuna back. That's like making 2 huge, high-profile signings in itself. So, I asked Dave Dombrowski yesterday, the Soto signing with the Mets, does that change the calculus for you guys at all? Do you have to do more now to try to keep up with what's going to be an intensified 3-team race? And his answer was no, because they expected all along that the Mets could end up with Soto. They knew that, Steve Cohen had all the money. His comment was that they had a pulse of where the market was going with Soto. That's why the Phillies didn't even end up meeting with him, because, they could have offered him $650 million and been wasting their time completely, seeing how that market ended up. But, when I look at the Mets roster, Soto is obviously an amazing addition for them, and the Mets were the better team than the Phillies down the stretch last year and obviously in the NLDS, but that's still an incomplete roster. Beyond the 4 spot in that batting order, a lot of question marks, four guys that are good at the top, but then, an incomplete rotation. Mostly number 3 or number 4 starters in that Mets rotation right now. So, they don't strike me as like a surefire 100-win team. They're going to be better, no doubt, and they gained a lot of confidence last season. But I still see it being a pretty tight NL East race, even if the Phillies didn't make any huge additions. That being said, I just still can't see a scenario where the Phillies run back 90% of the same team again.
Well, you look at the starting rotation. You brought that up. Obviously, you have Wheeler, Nola. Those are, your real no-brainers. Christopher Sanchez was great last year. Rangers become quite a bit of a question mark in the second half of last year. And then you have Taiwan Walker. Now, can you try to explain to me the situation with Taiwan Walker and what they'd be looking for from him, especially early on in the season?
Well, Dombrowski and Rob Thompson told us yesterday that he's beginning phase 2 of his off-season program, which is they're trying to not just throw with him, they're trying to do other activities that could potentially, improve his velocity, whether that's like core strength or this weighted ball program we've heard mentioned so many times with Taiwan Walker. Really all that matters when he shows up to spring training is he throwing 87 or is he throwing 92, 93. That's all that matters. But the Phillies are trying to make it work with him. They owe him all this money anyway, $18 million each of the next 2 seasons, so they probably see it like, why just burn all that money and not get anything out of it? Like, they're looking at the number 5 spot in the rotation as a wide-open competition. They're going to bring a bunch of guys to camp. There are some internal candidates like Walker, some of the young pitchers, Seth Johnson, Chase, who they added to the 40-man roster, acquired from the Orioles at the deadline this past year. Nick Abel's on the 40, although he still has a ways to go. And then you'd figure that the Phillies would also sign several guys to minor league deals or to like low money 1-year deals. Like Spencer Turnbull last year, wasn't he like 1 year in that $3 or $4 million range? He turned out to be a pretty good find for the first half of the season. So if you throw enough of those darts, one might stick. Unfortunately for the Phillies, none of those pitchers worked out in the second half last year. It was just a total catastrophe that they can't have happen again.
We're speaking with Corey Sideman. He does a tremendous job covering the Phillies for NBC Sports Philadelphia. Let me ask you about the age of this roster. They seem like on the one side a win now type of a group, but then there's other spots where they're really young. Second base, outfield, for example. What kind of player, as far as age-wise, do you think they would want to add to this roster, which seems like win now, but also maybe in this transition phase to maybe some younger guys being here?
Well, if you look at like some of the pursuits the Phillies have made, like last year when they went after Yamamoto, and that was because, he was a big ticket item, but it was also because he was like 25 years old, so he fit into a long-term, thought process. And there's Sasaki, who was posted this week, who's coming over, and he is not going to be subject to like an $150 million contract because you have to pay him with international bonus pool money. So there's like a limit to what any team can pay him. So he's a very attractive free agent as well. The Dodgers are believed to be the favorite, but the Phillies were one of 7 teams believed to be in on Roki Sasaki. So, I mean, when you look at moves like that tells you that they're interested in like growing with the player. Ideally, if they're going to sign a guy to a huge contract, they, mid-20s, late 20s, but that's not often the case in free agency. Guys often get there around 30 years old. The Phillies can say that they're not, the window's not closing, but I mean, JT Realmuto's getting older. He's a free agent after the year. Kyle Schwarber's a free agent after the year. Nick Castellanos is getting a year older. So really, it's like the next 2 or 3 years, they need to make this happen. They need to make it happen while Harper's still in the middle of his prime, while Turner's still in the middle of his prime, before Wheeler and Nola are, battling against Father Time and all the innings, because that's another underrated component of this successful run the Phillies have had, is that they've gotten like 200 innings out of Wheeler and Nola every year here for the last handful of years. And, we see how fragile pitching is. I don't know that you can rely on that every single year. So definitely have to make it happen in the next couple. But that being said, they're not going to trade Aiden Miller, for example, unless they're completely bowled over. I don't even think they would do that if they were bowled over. They would trade some prospects, but there's some guys that you just hear are untouchable, like a Painter, like an Aiden Miller.
Should we have any concern? I mean, obviously, JT Realmuto, he can't go behind the plate as much as he has been in the years past. Is there any concern about Garrett Stubbs being able to pick up that slack?
Well, Rafael Marchand is still in the picture, and I just get the sense that this year that job's going to go to who they think can handle, starts. And Garrett Stubbs provides value in game planning, and the pitcher's being comfortable with him, and he's good defensively. But, if JT is going to start 15 or 20 fewer games, then that's like 60 more at bats, and that's a difference. I mean, if Marchand proves to be the better offensive option, it should be him. And I agree that JT probably does need to play less, save his body a little bit, keep him, more productive toward the end of the year into the playoffs where he hasn't been as good. And, he's a big part of this because he's one of the guys last year that was just like in a season-long funk almost. JT, Bryson Stott just weren't themselves. Like JT was extending more than ever, so was Trey Turner. Bryson Stott was dealing with an elbow injury that seemed to affect his swing. So a lot of room to improve internally. If JT hits 10 points higher with like a slightly higher on-base percentage and the power comes back a little bit, and if Bryson Stott is closer to the player he was in 2023, the offense is going to be a lot better.
Well, Corey, we appreciate the update. Obviously, fans are waiting for a big, big splash, but we probably have to be realistic listening to you today. So we appreciate you tempering our expectations and giving us all this good information.
Thanks, Ty.
Appreciate it. That's Corey Sideman on the Comcast Business Hotline.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for watching our YouTube. If you want to help us out, go ahead and like and subscribe for us. If you liked what you saw, go right over here to our playlists and pick out whatever you want to watch.